1982, when I was 29 years old, I began to have this recurring dream that I had for the next year. And in this dream, it was always the same. I was outside. I was on some hills. There were some people there. I went up on this hill area, and pretty soon a lot more people began to gather there. And soon there was a big crowd. And someone came up to me and asked me what was going on. And I said I didn't know, but that I had heard it was the end of the world. And when I said that, in the sky appeared Jesus. And I thought, wow, perhaps it is the end of the world. But then when I looked up and saw Jesus, I just, the worst, most terrible agony I've ever experienced in my life came over me. But it wasn't like a physical pain. It was a heartfelt suffering pain. And I just doubled over down to the ground when this happened. And then the dream would suddenly end. And I would be, every time I would be just startled awake by this dream. And I continued to be puzzled, what this dream was about, and the fact that I continued to have it into the next year, because it started in the fall of 1982 and continued, as I said, into the next year of 1983. So I'm going to fast forward here to the day of Friday, October the 7th. And this was the day I was driving my husband, my then husband, to a meeting. And I was going to drop him off. And then I was going on down to the Greek festival. This was in Houston. And my husband was going to, with some friends, come down later in the day. So as I'm driving him to this meeting, I suddenly developed this very strange, sharp pain over my heart area as I'm driving. And I remember glancing at the clock in the car to see how we were doing on getting him to his meeting, and it said 9 o'clock. But I continued to have this pain over my heart, and I was filled with fear. I was thinking to myself, what was happening to me? I'd never had such a pain over my heart area like that. And I wondered if I had a blood clot or was I getting ready to have a heart attack? But I didn't say anything. And after about 15 minutes, it slowly faded away. And, I dropped off my husband. And then I continued on down to the Greek festival. And, when my friends and I started gathering there, people were coming, and soon the entire area, even inside the Greek Orthodox Church, and they have a huge outdoor area, it was completely filled with people. It's a very popular festival there in Houston every year. And by the time lunchtime came, and, there were just crowds of people everywhere. My friends and I had gone inside the church, and the area where they were serving food, an annex area there. And we're going to make our way toward, getting lunch. And as I was inside there, suddenly I saw across the room my husband making his way toward us. And I thought to myself, well, he's here early. But I thought, well, maybe he just decided to go ahead and take off early. And, I was really happy about that. But as I'm standing there and he gets closer and closer, I see his face. And I'd never seen him look like that before, ever. I mean, I knew something was horribly wrong, just from looking at his face. And then as he came up to me, he put both his hands on my arms, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, "Donnie was killed in an accident this morning." And I just, in my mind's eye, as I'm standing there looking at him, trying to process what I've just heard, I see in my mind the image of the earth, like the world, out in front of me in space, and that the world was just falling, 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 until it hit the floor and it just crashed into a million pieces. And then I just practically fell down to the floor, and I was just screaming and crying. And of course my friends ran over. They didn't know what was going on, but I just collapsed, and I just felt destroyed by everything. After that, of course, then we went to Bryan, which is where my brother lived and my parents live, and had the funeral. And I stayed on to help my parents after the funeral. So, did you have any questions for me?
No, no. You stayed on after the funeral. And what did you make of, what was the meaning you made of the pains in your heart, or the premonitions you had? What were the...
Well, as we went to Bryan, and of course, you know, we're there for the funeral, then I actually, the day that I was told, when my husband came to the church there, as we were driving back to our house in Sugar Land, then I knew and I understood what this dream that I'd had, this recurring dream for the past year, I understood what this dream was trying to do. And that was, number one, it was showing me the setting, the type of setting I was going to be in. Because, recall, there were all these crowds of people that gathered in this place outdoors, which a lot of that is outdoors there, and then, you know, to go in to eat. And the fact that Jesus appeared in the sky there related that to a religious aspect, a spiritual and religious aspect, which we were right there at this church. We were in the church and the annex there, and the entire area outdoors, the courtyard and everything, was all at the church there. So it was relating that, you know, there was some religious or spiritual aspect to that. And then, you know, the fact that I said, but it isn't supposed to be this way. I thought the end of the world was supposed to be happy. And then I fell down to the ground in this terrible agony, which is exactly what happened to me at the church, at this festival, the Greek festival. So at last I knew the meaning of this dream. But the other thing that happened is that while I was at my dad's house and people were coming to visit us, this was like the day before the funeral, as I was sitting in my dad and his wife's house, I felt that I could see my brother in the upper right-hand corner of the ceiling from where I was sitting. I knew he was there, that he was hovering there. But what I was saying to him was, why did this happen? Why did you do this? And so I did have that, what I consider a contact with him, even though it was, I could see it in my mind. And when I would look up at the corner, it was like I knew he was there. And then eventually he moved on. Then I stayed on that week, as I said, to help my parents. And on that Wednesday of that following week, I decided to take some funeral flowers to my grandparents' house. And they lived out in the country. It was about a 10 to 15-minute drive from my dad's house. And so the ironic thing about this is my brother was killed in this train accident. And he was on his way to the job site. So he was in a company truck. And he ended up hitting the side of this train because he was at the crossing at a completely different time of day than he had ever been there before. And because he had actually resigned from his job. He only had one more week to work there. He was going out to visit the new superintendent. And this crossing there are trees right up to the edge. So he was driving when he hit the side of the train that came out. And I ended up driving, when I had this experience, I was driving his personal truck at the time. And so I had his personal truck, I had the flowers in the back, and I was by myself, just driving along. And all of a sudden I realized as I'm driving that I'm seeing 360 degrees around me. I can see everything around me as I'm driving. And as I'm thinking to myself, what is happening to me? Then I began to realize that I could see my brother at my right shoulder. And he was there, but he was like a pattern of lights, but I could still see him as he was here on earth. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was kind of like a double deal. He was a pattern of lights, but I still recognized him. And he began speaking to me telepathically as I'm still driving. I'm still having 360-degree vision. And he says to me, I don't want you to be sad. I want you to understand that I'm happy now. And I want to show you a little bit of what it's like for me. And at that point, I left my body and I went with him. The whole time of this experience was going on. He remained at my right-hand shoulder, just behind me. And when I first was out of my body, I could see, I would describe it as like looking at a black and white negative of a photo or something. And it was just trees and landscape, but that didn't last very long. And then it became all about my consciousness, that I was experiencing being in infinity with my brother. And I knew that's where I was with him. I almost had this sense of being out in the universe. You know, at some point it was almost like I was seeing stars and everything, but I was so taken in by the emotions and experience I was having that the setting around me didn't seem to matter. But the first thing I experienced was this feeling of all peace. Just this wave of complete peace came over me. And I actually thought about the Bible verse, the peace that passeth understanding. And secondly, I realized that I knew everything in the universe, that I had, I just knew all knowledge that there is in the universe. I knew it. And then thirdly, I experienced this energy of pure universal love. And it was an energy, of course, people call it a being or, refer to that as God. But it was just this all-encompassing energy of love, and I knew that this was what created us and the universe, and that everything in creation is part of that everything is all one with that spirit of love and that energy, and with everything that is, and all people, we're all one. That was the feeling and the information that I received. And so at that point, I just knew that I was home. Being in this state of being or consciousness, I knew that I was home. And so that's why I felt all these things. I was at peace, and I just knew that I was home. And the other thing was, at that point I realized I didn't care anything at all about returning to my body. I knew I was out of my body, but I didn't care about going back. I didn't want to go back. And after having these emotions and experiences, as I began to think that, I felt like I was whooshing away through the universe. My brother was still with me. And when that began to happen, because I wanted to go on to the next level, I don't consider that I was at what people would call heaven. I felt like I needed to go on to the next level to reach that, where I could totally cross over into that realm. But as that started to happen, my brother said to me telepathically, "No, you can't go yet. It's not your time." And then he used his energy to push me back down. And the next thing I knew, I was seeing myself come back into my body, and I just kind of landed there. That's how it felt, like I just landed inside my body with this thud. And then I was back in the truck driving. And at that point, I realized that somehow I had actually made a turn onto the road that took me directly to my grandparents. And to this day, I don't have any recollection of driving during that time period, which I estimated to be maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes between where I was and, the point at which I probably made the turn and was already on the road to my grandparents.